Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at part 8 of the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles. So this part is called Hercules Consults the Oracle. So if we step back and think about part 7, the last chapter we did, Hercules had just murdered his family in this fit of madness, right? He had killed them with his own hands. He'd retreated off into the woods. He didn't want to talk to anybody. Nobody wanted to talk to him. And now he's looking to sort of find out how he can atone for his sins. Really, that's what this chapter is really about. So it starts with Hercules, right? Hercules tantum scelus expiare magnoper cupiebat. So Hercules, he cupiebat, he was desiring, magnoper, very much, right? Very greatly desiring. Expiare means to sort of atone, I guess you'd probably say, like atone for. Tantum scelus, such a crime, right? So he wants to find a way to make up for his sin of murdering his family, right? So to do this, he goes to find an answer. And you have constituit igitur ad oraculum delphicum ire, hoc enim oraculum erat omnium celeberimum. So he decided, constituit, right? Therefore, he decided, ire, to go, which is a complementary infinitive. He decided to go to the Delphic oracle, the oraculum delphicum, right? So the Delphic oracle is something worth pausing on and just making sure that if you haven't looked this up before, you do. You can see a picture of it here in the middle. But the oracle at Delphi was famous, right? In ancient Greece, this is where you would go and you would ask the oracle questions about your future and you'd get an answer, right? Usually sort of jumbled up and muddled and a little confusing, but you would get an answer. And so it's a place to go to kind of find out your future and find out what you're supposed to do. So the location is a really famous one. And again, I'd encourage you to take a look at it. So he decides to go there, and it says, for this oracle, hoc oraculum, right, it was the most famous, celeberimum, there's your superlative. It was the most famous omnium of all. And the reason you have most famous of all is you want to remember there's more than one oracle, right? In the world, there's different places you could go to kind of find out answers to questions. It's just the Delphic one happens to be the most famous in ancient Greece. But there were others, right? That's why it's described as the omnium celeberimum, right? The most famous of all. So he goes to this oracle, and you have ibi templum erat Apollonis plurimis donis ornatum. There we go, right? So there, meaning at Delphi, there was a temple, right? And it's a temple ornatum. So the ornatum here is going with erat. So it had been, you might say, decorated, right? Excuse me, ornare means to adorn or decorate. So erat ornatum, you could say, had been decorated. And it's the temple of Apollo, right? Apollonus. It had been decorated with gifts, right? Plurimis donis, with very many gifts. So the idea here is that you would go into, a Greek temple, and people would decorate the temple with a bunch of gifts. Particularly at Delphi, you can still see the temples and sort of treasuries that were there. And people would give gifts to Apollo, right? That's who is in charge of Delphi. So in his temple, it's trying to say there was a bunch of stuff there. It's just giving you a little insight into what was happening in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. And again, I'd encourage you to look this up on your own if you're interested. Then you have hoc in templo sedebat femina quaedam nomine Pythia et consilium dabat eis qui ad oraculum veniebant. So in this temple, right? Hoc in templo. So in this temple was sitting, sedebat is just imperfect, a femina quaedam, right? A certain woman named Pythia, right? Nomine Pythia. So if I remember right, Pythia is not her name. I think it's the title. So we refer to her as the Pythia. And it would kind of change. The Pythia or Pythia is the woman who would give out these prophecies, right? She would give prophecies and they would be sort of interpreted by priests there, but the Pythia is the one giving responses from the god Apollo is kind of the idea. So there's a woman, right, a femina quaedam, and dabat consilium, she was giving advice, right? You might say counsel, consilium, that's her role, is to give answers to these questions. So she was there giving advice or giving counsel to those, right? Eis is dative here, to them, you might say, but it's really meaning those people. And it's the dative is really going with dabat, right? She was giving consilium to them, and it's those who, when yebant, who were coming ad oraculum, to the oracle. So her job was to give the advice or give the counsel to people who came to the oracle looking for answers. Then you have haec autem femina ab ipso Apolline docebator et voluntatem Dei hominibus enuntiabat. So this woman, however, right, autem, so however this woman, dokebator, so here we have a passive infinitive. She was taught is how you want to translate it. And then we have the ablative of agent, right, who taught her. So again, when you have passive voice verbs, there's oftentimes the ablative telling you who was doing the actual action, right? Because remember, in this form with the passive voice, the woman is not doing anything. Something's happening to her. So it's saying this woman, however, was taught by Apollo himself, ipso Apolline, right? So she was taught by Apollo himself to interpret kind of his words. And enuntiabat, she was speaking, you might say. She was announcing, she was proclaiming, however you want to kind of do it, speaking out, you might say. The voluntatem, the will, right? The will or the wish. Will is probably a good way to do it here. So she was announcing out the will of the god, hominibus, to the people. Right. So the idea here is that you would ask her a question. She would tell you an answer, and her answer, because she'd been taught by Apollo, it represented the voluntatem, the will or the wishes of the god. Okay. So she kind of speaks for him is the idea. And you have to interpret the response. So then you have Hercules igitor, qui Apollinem praecipue colebat hoc venit, right? So Hercules, therefore, right, who colebat. Colebat here, it's the verb of worshiping, right, is really what it's doing. It means to cultivate, like colere. But in this context, it probably has a better translation of worshiping. And because it's imperfect, it implies rather that repeated action. So you might want to say Hercules, who used to worship praecipue frequently. Right, so who used to, or especially rather, not frequently, who used to especially worship Apollo. Apollinem is your direct object. He came here, right? Hoc venit. So Hercules came here because he was, especially fond of worshiping Apollo, right? So he shows up at the Oracle of Delphi. Then you have tum rem totam exposuit neque scelos celauit. So then he exposuit, he kind of put out, right? He explained, you might say, probably explained is a good way to do it. It literally means to like set out or put out, right? Pono ponere. But explained is a good way to do it. Perfect tense. Then he explained the entire thing, the rem totam, right? That's your direct object, the entire affair, meaning the fact that he had killed his family, right? His crime. So he explained the whole thing to the oracle, and he did not hide. Neque celauit. So celare means to hide, right? So neque here means like, and he did not, right? He did not hide scelos, his crime. Remember, scelos is a neuter word, right? So that's why you have scelos in the accusative singular here. So he didn't hide the crime. He told everything. He just came right out with it, and he explained what had happened. Okay, so this is the idea. If you want atonement, you have to be honest. And Hercules he finally finds somewhere where he can go, and he's asking for advice of how can he make up for murdering his family. The answer we're going to get in the next chapter, and you'll see this is going to set him on the path of the 12 labors, which, just to spoil the ending for you, that is his atonement for his crime, right? And it explains why he goes off and does these 12 things, which many of you might have already heard of. But hopefully this made sense, right? It's not a particularly long chapter. The grammar is pretty straightforward. I think the only real crazy thing in there, and it's not so crazy, was a pluperfect verb, and you had a little bit of passive voice, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'll help you however I can, or if you want something explained a little bit better. But otherwise, keep working on this, and like I always tell you, start with the vocab, make sure you got a pretty good understanding of the grammar, and find someone to read this to. If you could read this aloud, practice your speaking, it's always good. And if you can find someone from class to read it back to you, the listening skills are really important too, so never neglect those. But hopefully it'll be making more sense as you go. Good luck.